Everyone. For the Aviation History Conference, I'll be talking about the F-104 Starfighter. This presentation will mainly go over the aircraft's development, its service with the United States Air Force and multiple other nations, along with its involvement in the Lockheed bribery scandals. Before we understand anything about the F-104 Starfighter, I think it's first important that we learn about the Lockheed Corporation. The Lockheed Corporation was formed in 1926 from the legs of Alan Lockheed, Jack Northrop, Kenneth Kay, and Fred Keeler, along with funding from investors. Through the company's history until merging with the Martin Marietta Corporation in 1995, Lockheed produced versatile aircraft for the civilian and military market. They mainly got their start in the civilian market with models such as the Vega and the Electra, which were popular among pilots like Amelia Earhart. And then during World War II and afterwards, they paved the way for military aircraft such as the P-38, U-2, and SR-71. Now, if you're going to talk about how important Lockheed is in military development, you basically have to mention Skunk Works. Skunk Works was formed in 1943 after observed rapid advancements in German fighter technology. Since the start of the war, its first task was to develop a suitable fighter jet for the United States Air Force to replace the underwhelming P-59 Air Comet. Since then, Skunk Works has been where Lockheed's top-of-the-line engineers design aircraft for a variety of projects, such as the U-2, SR-71, and the F-22 Raptor. Development of the F-104 started all the way back in 1952 as a response to fighter pilots fighting MiG-15s in Korea. They requested a simple fighter aircraft with high speed and high altitude performance. A design was made by Lockheed, designated the Model 083. It weighed only 12,000 pounds and had a single turbojet engine with short trapezoidal wings that were razor thin. This produced a high wing loading on the aircraft, which meant they would have to fly at very high airspeeds in order to stay airborne. A pair of prototypes was set to be built after winning a contract and were given the designation of the XF-104. It first flew on the 4th of March, 1954. The aircraft's existence was never a secret, but it wasn't publicly viewed by anyone until 1956. Before then, Popular Mechanics, of all things, was the first group to actually make any sort of accurate depiction of the aircraft before it was ever photographed, based off of depictions and descriptions given by the Air Force. After the loss of one of the XF-104 prototypes, 30 YF-104A pre-production models were ordered in November of 1955. These pre-production models were used to evaluate the aircraft's flight characteristics with modifications made. A more powerful General Electric J79 engine was added, which necessitated the aircraft being lengthened by 5.5 feet. A boundary layer control module was also added to the aircraft to allow lower landing speeds. This bled excess air from the compressor over the trailing edge flaps to increase lift at low speeds. This gained about or shaved off about 30 knots of airspeed for landings, which made it a lot less of a stressful affair for pilots. The aircraft was delayed from full production due to the request to the ability to add the fire capability of AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. In 1958, the Air Force was mainly concerned about not having enough jet-powered bombers to combat the Soviet Union in the event of a nuclear war, since ICBM technology had not made the intercontinental nuclear bomber obsolete yet. However, Convair's F-102 Delta Dagger and F-106 Delta Dart were experiencing developmental delays, so the F-104 was used as a temporary stopgap and first entered service with the 83rd Fighter Interceptor Squadron out of Hamilton Air Force Base. It was first deployed in the Second Taiwan Strait Crisis later that year as a deterrent. The F-104's presence is credited as one of the reasons a ceasefire was agreed upon. Once in service, the aircraft soon became the first aircraft to hold simultaneous records for both altitude at 180,000 feet, a time to climb of 98,000 feet in only 15 minutes, and an airspeed of over Mach 2. It was deployed in the Vietnam War as a patrol and protector aircraft for early warning and control aircraft. It succeeded in its role, protecting EWAC aircraft, but never recorded any kills during the conflict. Gradually, the Air Force began to favor more maneuverable aircraft for its fighters. The F-104 was gradually shifted to Air National Guard roles as interceptors, and then retired fully in 1983 when it was being used as a trainer for West German pilots. The NF-104, an astronaut trainer, nearly killed Chuck Yeager in 1963 when he entered an unrecoverable flat spin. If you want to watch this, I would recommend the movie The Right Stuff, which is about, or not necessarily about, but Chuck Yeager flies the F-104 in the movie. The F-104 did see more action overseas, especially with the Pakistani Air Force. During the Indo-Pakistani War of 1965, the F-104 recorded multiple kills against Indian Fallen Gnats and Dassault Mystères, as well as English electric Canabaris bombers. It was seen as a formidable opponent by Air Force pilots, especially for being able to fire the AIM-9 missiles, of which the Indians had no air-to-air missiles at the time. It was also used to harass Indian air bases by performing sonic booms directly above air bases as a show of force and as a show of general annoyance. Sonic booms are, after all, extremely, extremely loud. The aircraft, however, gained its most of its reputation from the West German Luftwaffe. The West German government ordered a total of 607 airframes by the end of the 1960s, more than any other client of Lockheed that bought the F-104. Lockheed, wanting to make more money off of the aircraft, decided to update the aircraft slightly and advertise it as a ground attack and reconnaissance aircraft along with its already existing capabilities, which is a pretty tall order to say that your high altitude, high speed interceptor is also a low speed, low altitude ground attack aircraft. It's a bit of foreshadowing of what's about to happen. West German pilots were given severely inadequate training to fly the F-104, some receiving not much more than a refresher course in subsonic aircraft. While in service, almost half of all West German F-104s were destroyed in accidents, and over 100 pilots were killed alone. In the United States, the aircraft was nicknamed by pilots as the missile with a man in it, as a more or less comedic moniker. In the West, Germany, or in West Germany, it was called the Widowmaker for its incessant ability to kill its own pilots and leave widowed women in West Germany. These accidents were largely attributed to pilots not having enough training to fly the difficult aircraft, and also updated avionics and technology overburdening air crews with distractions. The F-104 has what's called extremely high wing loading, which means that in order for the aircraft to fly in with a certain amount of given lift, it needs a large amount of airspeed to be going over those wings, which means that low speed is maneuvers of any kind are extremely dangerous. Landing is at over 180 knots for this aircraft. You can't like that's 80 knots faster than like the fastest speed you can go in a Cessna. It also experienced issues with just visibility and ending up in flat spins. German pilots were told that you could do these low speed maneuvers, but they weren't adequately trained. American pilots needed around 1,500 hours total of flying time in order to be qualified to fly the F-104 Starfighter. German pilots needed only about 500 hours, which is not nearly as much. So it ended up being a huge piece of controversy because so many pilots were dying. And but it begs the question, why did the West German Air Force order so many of these airplanes? Well, in the 1970s, Lockheed made agreements with the United States government that it would take on some of Lockheed's debt if it defaulted on its loans. In 1975, a committee investigated whether or not Lockheed violated its government agreement about disclosure of foreign payments. A Senate led committee got Lockheed to admit that it ended up spending $24 million overseas to bribe officials to buy their aircraft, mainly the F 104. West German Defense Minister Franz Josef Strauss was paid at least $10 million alone for the purchase of up to 900 F 104 Starfighters. This caused a significant amount of outrage in West Germany, especially against the Lockheed Corporation and extreme distrust for the company, especially because it killed many of its pilots. But this wasn't limited to just West Germany. They bribed officials in Japan, the Netherlands, Italy, and Saudi Arabia. And it was not only for the F-104. The scandal also involved things like their airliner, the L-111 TriStar, and things like the C-130 Hercules. Now, what is the F-104 doing today? Are there any still around that still fly? Well, yes, in fact, there are. Starfighter Incorporated currently operates three former Italian Air Force F-104s as high-speed research platforms. These are mainly used as test beds for avionics, instruments on the outside of airplanes, but also used as enemy aircraft in fighter simulations. And every now and then, you might be able to see one at an air show, which is pretty cool in my opinion. They are one of the coolest aircraft that I've ever seen fly and make one of the most beautiful engine noises of any aircraft ever. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. But that is the duration of the presentation. Thank you.